Hello, and welcome to another episode of Songs Nobody Asked Me For. I've decided to sit somewhere slightly different today, and you can see the pictures that are often behind me when I do these things, just on the wall over there, really. So I'm just in the same room, slightly different angle. I don't know why, just, mashing it up a bit, mashing it up. I'm really, another interview today, but in the second part with Pav. And I said I was going to do this, and Pav and his wife came to visit us, and I wasn't sure we were going to fit it in. Would we fit it in? Wouldn't we? And then, as you will see, we did 20 minutes, and then food was ready, and I'd been cooking it. So there was a sudden. My wife sort of like popped around the side of. You can't see her towards the end of the interview, saying, "Yeah, the pinger's going off on the cooker," and it's all very rock and roll stuff, really. So we had to sort of finish quite quickly, but in a sense, it kind of focused us down for sort of 20 minutes on. I'm particularly thinking today about songwriting and also, what I've loved about some of this is just meeting people whose emphasis and direction and how they do things and what they do and why they do it is different. And there's really a sort of, to me, and there always was really a political element to Pav's music. Not about, I think he says in this, not about saying you should do this, but more about noticing things in society and noticing the way they are. And he talks about that, and I'm really aware, and I think I say it in there, that I've probably been influenced by his words and how he writes words. I'm gonna the intro and the outro. I'm gonna use a song that we used to play in the old band called Yogi Bear, and Pav wrote it. Pav wrote the words and the music, and I think he says in there that was unusual. Very often with our band, I'd written the music, Pav would write the words. It was rare that we had one where Pav had done all of it, but we had some of them. And this was one of them, and there's lots of nice little lines in this song that really are clever and I think are really interesting. So I'm going to use that bit of music, and we talk about that bit of music and some of the words within it and what he came up with there and why. And the great joy is he's actually sat next to me, so I don't have any of this massive YouTube dilemma about is this going to sound okay, is it going to be all right, is it going to work? So really, really pleased about it. I'm here just beginning of September, and the podcasts are chugging along. They're kind of okay, and I'm getting a sort of trickle and stream of people watching them. I'm going on the radio next week, Ocean City Radio, just to sort of promote it a bit, really. And they were interested. So that's great. I'm sure I'll be advertising that on Facebook and Instagram later today or tomorrow. And it feels good. I've had a little break. I've not done this for maybe just over a week, 10 days. I'm aware of being so far ahead of myself that I need to catch up. And that's just because, I feel as I'm doing it, I'm not very contemporaneous. I can't respond to anything in the moment or change stuff. And I watch some of my videos and recordings and think, I'd like to do this, or I'd like to do this differently. And it doesn't really, I don't have the capacity to do that until a long way down the line. But it's difficult because when I get into a little run when I'm interested in things, or like this impromptu, I manage to get somebody who wants to talk to me, then it's hard not to do an episode, really. But I have an idea of what I'm going to talk about in the next episode that's just me. And I'm trying to just sit on my hands for a while and not do that just yet. But there we go. Anyway, here's me and Pav in my music room, catching up. Couple of old geezers talking about songwriting and how we've done that in the past and what we think about it now, really. Hope you enjoy it, and see you again soon. We're back again, and this is quite funny because we've literally just been Pav's come to visit his wife, and we're waiting for dinner to cook. We've got 20 minutes, so 20 minutes is a bit scary, whereas last time we talked forever. So last time we talked about sort of history, didn't we, really, and sort of thinking about the bands we've been in. And I suppose I was particularly interested in today thinking a little bit about songwriting, really. Mm. And I suppose one of the things I've been curious with other people I've been meeting now was where you think that might come from in your childhood. I mean, what influences were around, how comes it was that maybe you got into that as a process, do you think, as a person?
Well, I don't, it's hard to actually remember, I think.
That's our age.
Yeah, no, I think obviously when I started playing guitar, in terms of my electric guitar, I was just copying different tunes that I was familiar with, or I suddenly got excited. I thought, well, I can play like this person, or I can play this guitar solo. So I don't think I thought about writing songs at all at that point in time. And then probably when we decided to sort of start the band, or the Deluded Romantics as it became, we must have talked about doing our own stuff. I think the very first song we did was one of yours, and then I think the next time we played, we did at least a couple of covers, which was the Inmates Walk. Obviously, now we know it's Jimmy Rrroocckkk, but at that time that was the
we also did a song called "I Wish This Night Would Never End" by Sad Cafe. I don't know whether you remember that.
I don't remember that.
No, I did. I didn't remember the walk, and I kind of just. And I did put a little clip of your first song on here, one of these, just to show how bad the recording sound was because their heads were worn, and so somehow we seemed to think that was okay. "Blind Love," I think it was.
Oh yes, yeah. Well, that was what. Yeah, that was definitely one of the early songs that I'd written. So yeah, I was trying to think back in terms of what the sort of process was. I remember actually being at school with a yellow A4 binder, which had what I think they were a mixture of songs and poems. It's not that I'd been writing loads of poetry before then or anything like that, but some I thought were more suitable as poems rather than songs, sort of thing. So I was just trying to explore different things. But in terms of songwriting and influences, so I think initially a lot of, because I think I was very much influenced by this idea that pop songs should be simple, straightforward. Obviously most pop songs are, in terms of either sort of 4/4 beat or and following a verse chorus middle eight sort of pattern. So I was quite happy. I certainly wasn't into the idea or considered the idea of doing anything sort of outside of those strictures. But I mean, it's also helpful because it provides you with the structure, particularly if you're not experienced in that area. And I suppose the only other thing which I took for granted pretty much was that they should rhyme.
A bit of rhyming,
AB rhyme scheme. So those are the sort of things I think I just utilise. And then in terms of what to write about, I can't really remember sort of either consciously thinking, "Oh, I must write about that." Though that may well have happened with some of the songs, or you have an idea of what you want to do. So some there are some songs I can remember directly. So when you first did Under the Hammer, or when we first started doing that, and I wrote the words to that, because if you remember, most of the songs you had your own words, or at least a basic structure of something,
and
you
they were
sing
pretty
that.
naff. That's what. And
then the thing is, we at least it could give me a chance to get to know the melody and stuff, and then based on your melody, it would work the words around that. But that was an example which was directly influenced. I'd just been watching the telly. It was a documentary about I think it was like either a single mum based in Newcastle or up in the northeast, who was struggling to make ends meet, and she had a young child and all this. And obviously this was early 80s, so you're talking about all the sort of post Thatcher. I mean, obviously she'd been in power for at least one term by then. She got re-elected in 83, I think it was, after the Falklands War, because she was in pretty much danger of being kicked out. Had that not occurred, and then she got re-elected. Yes, and of course, so it was a dire time, obviously, particularly for people in those traditional industrial areas or whatever. So I think that caught my imagination. I think it was, but obviously this was on a very human level, because this is one woman's experience. But obviously, if you extrapolate that experience and look at it in the political context of what was going on, I think that's what So for me, it was like telling a simple story, but actually telling a much bigger thing, but through just one person's sort of experience.
It's simple to shout the need to curse love, but if she had money, she'd save. Oh, and under the hammer, they drive her down, the cradle, down to the grave.
So that was a direct thing, whereas other songs, sometimes it's just, I think you just come up with a line or something comes into your head, you write it down, and then you think, oh, what should go next, sort of thing. So I think that's much more. They use the term organic these days a lot, don't they?
Yeah.
So in that sense, so that evolves. I suppose that's the phrase I'm looking at.
And that you know, I mean, I've often tried to explain this to people about songwriting, so I think I do a combination of all of those. So you know, you kind of think, well, I've got some desire to say something, possibly. I've got a nice hook of a line, and then how do I join these things together?
Yeah.
So that when people ask you what a song is about, you say, well, it's kind of about this. Or if you said, oh, well, it's about your relationship, you say to a couple, but they said, but we're not this, and we're not. Yeah, but there's a couple of lines in there that are really significant. They really say something, but the rest of it, sometimes you're gluing together, or you have an association or something that sounds more interesting because you found something that strays from the original story. Mm. And I was reminded when you were talking about, we had a song called Ugly Girl, which you rewrote the words for. And I think I would have always said your songs were often quite political or sat within a political context. Oh. But I remember it being played on a radio station down here, a local radio station thing. They wanted something of mine to play because I was playing singer-songwriter stuff then, and that was the only stuff I had recorded. Yeah. And I played that. I gave them Ugly Girl, the Duran Duran version, as I've worked out later, because we had one with like brass section in it, and somebody said that sounds like Duran Duran. I thought, no, I don't want to sound like Duran Duran. Yeah. Anyway, they listened to it. You heard the end, and there was this little pause, and they went, right. So I have no idea what the fuck that was about, but that was, and I liked that at the time, and I still do, because I think, well, that's because it wasn't a poppy little love song, you know, it was something around, well, I would, as I would understand it, power and corruption and you know, the world we lived in and suppression and all of that sort of thing sat within that song, really.
Yes, that's right, and it was, I mean, I like to, so in terms of like influence, I would. I think probably quite a strong influence early on was Elvis Costello's writing.
Yeah, I've said that in another one.
And I think his use of language, the way he used to play with words, humour in. So I think, again, I mean, like you say, whilst you know, I had strong sort of political leanings, I was very much against writing a political song as such, or one
to be careful of it,
that preached or said you must do this or you must support this sort of thing. So, because I think for a lot of people that's not necessarily their experience. No. You experience things through in many different ways. So I think so that was one element of it. I think the other thing is playing with words. I think the more you start writing, and I think it's part of having fun as well, and not taking yourself too seriously. So, and later on, I would almost put jokes in the words, but not
who's there.
Yeah, almost. But almost, So you just looking at things on a humorous level, because I think also that's quite appealing to people in that you can address quite serious subjects, but you can do it in a playful way.
And I think I learned that from you, because I try very hard, you know, because I more and more moved to this place of wanting to say something, but not wanting to preach. And so I either hide messages in things or slip things in, or I use humour, you know, and I talked in an earlier podcast about you introducing me to Elvis Costello, really, and I love Elvis Costello's words and the humour, the dark humour, because it's often very bleak humour that he uses, but just... I can see that in a lot of your songs.
And when I heard him interviewed, you probably quite a while later when he talks about songwriting, and he'll say the same sort of things. Some of the things that he wrote, he say, they're actually cringeworthy, and you do realise. I mentioned one that he mentioned, which I don't think I noticed it in the song, and it's not one of his particularly well-known ones, but he said he used this word, this phrase, which is so crass. He says with a wave so tidal. So he's obviously talking about somebody waving.
Yeah.
And I have done that as well, where I've written something in which is also what's the word? So it's I'm trying to remember the name of the song, and I think this is actually one of my tunes, so it was unusual in that sense. Yogi Bear, that's right.
Yeah, Yogi Bear.
So obviously the title itself is a bit of a joke, and I can't remember why the hell I put that in
because it's about the running, isn't it? I always thought, I think the line is "we can't all run like Yogi Bear," and I always think of that thing when they do that thing in the air before they move, and just being completely stuck in the air.
Yeah, exactly. So, but obviously, not many people actually called the song Yogi Bear. That has nothing to do with Yogi Bear at all. But there were a couple of things that I played with deliberately there, which were sort of communal sort of garden phrases that you sort of grow up in, like bird in hand is worth three in the bush or whatever. So there's a reference to those kind of things in there. Stitch in time saves nine and all this sort of thing. So that was partly a sort of again, it's sort of slightly mocking because it's like where do these phrases come from?
It's also humour and relation, is it? Because that line, a stitch in time saves nine, he said, but I've always hated sewing, a penny for your thoughts, he said, but I never carry cash. You see, I know your words, he said.
Yes.
And I think they're very clever, and I think that song in particular, that says those two things, and I do think it's influenced me moving forward. I used to write these pappy sort of flipping love songs, or I'd try and write. I remember writing a song about working in a pub, and I remember one of my songs was called Hypochondriac's Ecstasy, and and all these weird things I used to do. But nowadays I try to take those. I want it to mean something. It's a bit of a Bowie thing as well, and that's sort of almost like the words not necessarily going in the right order or making sense. And I like being vague, whereas I've met a couple of people on this podcast now who just write. This guy called Craig, he writes beautiful words, and it'd be about something in his life, but it's just really clear, and I'm really jealous because it doesn't sound twee, it doesn't sound corny, some people have that ability just to, and interestingly, all his songs come from the words, first of all, he writes the words, whereas I think for me more, it's often been that melody and that hook and that stuff that sort of...
I think the other thing, I know we're talking about songwriting, but it probably applies to writers generally, is that you can sit there with your guitar in your room and think, oh, I'd like to write a song, and then you sort of sit there and you think, was that waiting for this divine inspiration to come, and of course it doesn't. And obviously you do get that occasionally if something comes into your head, but usually it's just hard work.
Yes.
And what you end up doing, I think obviously when I started writing, I was writing all sorts of stuff, and also probably plagiarising other people's stuff quite easily. Certainly some probably phrases or words that I'd heard already. Sometimes you do that consciously and sometimes it's subconscious. But I think the more practice you do and the more experienced you become, you then realise that you actually have to sit down and spend a bit of time and do some...
It's a craft, isn't it? You have to work at it. I've said this again on here, that there are people who can give you licks, or they can give you a chorus, or they can give you a rhythm or a beat, but actually there is an artistry in songwriting, and it sounds a bit big-headed, but there is. You have to, and it's exactly what you're saying, really. You have to work at it, don't you? And you have to... And I find it quite a painful process and a difficult process sometimes to actually produce stuff, really.
Yeah. And the other thing, I just one other thing that occurred to me was that I think possibly because of Costello and other influences, sometimes you want to put, you've got almost too many ideas, and you want to put them all into the song. Or you've got very long sentences which you're trying to fit into a phrase, which some people can get away with, and sometimes you just think, well, actually you need to make it slightly simpler, and sometimes it can be more effective. I think, and this is where I think the balance between the music and the lyrics are really important, because it's the dynamic you create when you're playing in a band. And one of the things you want to do is create some space in there. Otherwise, it's a bit like when you sort of first start out and everyone's playing all at once.
Yeah.
Together, or playing as loud as they can as possibly their instrument as loud as they can, so they can compete with everyone else.
Yeah.
And you get that. I think that develops over time. The more experienced you become, and I think the other thing is actually writing. I mean, if you look at lots of different artists and different songs, I think particularly if you think about. So I was saying obviously like verse chorus into a very traditional sense, and we grew up in those decades where pop songs followed a particular formula. Whereas now, if you look at both pop music and which is much more influenced by dance music, so the lyrics almost obviously in some songs can be not irrelevant, but they're sort of they're just there to represent a hook. They're not there for any particular meaning or anything. But what it means is there's much more space for the music and different sounds and effects coming into play, and the rhythm as well. So that's really interesting, I think, in terms of people who can write in that way, quite a sparse way, and that's something else I suppose I'd like to try more of, really. But I think partly if you write songs on guitar, sometimes it's quite interesting just to think, well, how would that sound with a different with different instruments?
And I do think at some level, unless we're very lucky, we find ourselves in a space of how we create, and kind of, like you say, we can think, oh, I wonder how I might do, when we first started moving into wanting to be a bit more funk orientated, I listened to stuff that's what I realised I just can't play it that way, really, which is why we've developed this idea of indie funk, because I think it's always going to have that indie guitar background and element in my songs, because it's kind of what I do, really. But I guess all these people have spaces in which they do something, and then some people reinvent themselves, don't they, or change what they do. I'm really aware this is a very odd interview, because we're just about to have dinner, and we had 20 minutes, didn't we, really? And that's I'm aware we've got 3 or 4 minutes really left, which is a real shame, but maybe good for us, because we spoke for about an hour last time, and I try and keep these about 20 minutes long. More succinct. Yeah. The last thing I wanted to talk, because it just made me almost kind of full circle to your origins within all of this, and thinking, I was thinking of your dad, who I knew very well, and he passed away recently, in about sort of 999 years old. How old was he when he passed?
97.
97, an amazing 97. But he was very political when he was younger, and very sort of, you had that sort of whole background, which we haven't got time to talk about here. But politics and has always been interesting and important to you. And it's just an observation that as we've been talking, it's almost like we've naturally assumed or said that politics sits within some of what we write, really. And it just made me think about it. It's an observation more than anything else about you and about those roots. And I suppose if I had more time to expand on it, it made me curious about the idea whether there was something in the writing of music that was also a political expression, as someone who's, you work for a trade union, you kind of, it's been a part of your life.
The thing is, you can't, I mean, obviously when you're writing songs, it's about observation, isn't it? What's going on around you. So it's not, and I think, it's the ability to see ordinary everyday things that happen to you, literally walking down the street or in the area you're living in or whatever, but also linking that it's not in a separate or parallel universe to everything else that's going on. So it's part of a bigger picture. So I suppose my perspective is always going to be influenced in that way, but also it's not political in the sense of party political in that sense. It's just observations,
societal observations of what's going on in the world,
going on. I mean, obviously, I can have I don't think I ever actually expressed a direct sort of view in terms of what we'd like things to be like. It was much more of a, which I think is probably quite common. You criticise things.
It's a critique of what's around,
as opposed to offering a sort of a pamphlet or a template, or this is what we really should be doing, because then you're veering outside of.
And maybe we share that with Elvis, Elvis Costello. We call him Elvis now.
Well, I think also it's limited. I think music has its limitations in terms of
We'll be there.
If you
That's fine. I'm coming. Yep, there we are.
if you
Hello,
want to,
dinner's
funny
ready.
enough, I'm just reading a book about Joe Strummer, and there's a whole debate. This is amongst academics in terms of how not how political he was, but how impactful he was. And the author makes the point, which I've also come to the same conclusion, was that ultimately he was a musician. He was not a politician, and he was not an activist.
No.
So he talked about lots of things as an observer, and he could also exposed a lot of the audience to different things that were going on.
People to
but
think,
that's
doesn't it?
yeah. So it gets you to think, but don't put him on a pedestal as like he's anything more than that.
I get that.
You know, there's a danger that you could do that.
Yeah, well, we've got to go, haven't we? Because we'll be in trouble. I'll burn the dinner. Thank you very much. And it's really lovely to actually be in the room with you this time.
For the opportunity.
And there we go. You know, I kind of, really enjoyed it. It's so nice to sit and spend time with Pav. And I wanted to talk for longer, but food was really nice. And I always like food. So food always gets a priority in a lot of things, really. If you've enjoyed the session, do let me know. Started to get 1 or 2 comments now, which is nice from the earlier podcasts. And do follow the band. # Music the Curve. You'll find us, and please follow this, subscribe, and see you again soon.
And if all your thoughts